Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, the new year feels a little more real now. Everyone is circling back. So we're here to catch you up on a bunch of news from the first full week of the year. We're talking about detention and deportation, the governor's sports tickets and higher Turnpike tolls, one very important sticker contest with the county, and ways to watch Pittsburgh on TV while you're cozied up and away from all the snow. It's Friday, January 10th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with CityCast producers Sophia Lowe and Mallory Falk. Hey, Megan.
Hello.
Hi. If you are new here, first of all, welcome. Every Friday, we go through some of the biggest stories, the big news stories of the week.
Little bit of this, little bit of that.
All the stuff you need to know. And since we haven't had a regular roundup show like this since before the holidays, we'll have a few more updates and stories than usual today.
But we also have something new, something fun starting this week. Trivia.
Woo! We have actually been doing this in our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter and on our website for a few months now, if you really like answering questions. But starting now, maybe most weeks, we promise most, on Fridays, you'll also hear a little tease of that week's trivia. And we are starting today, right now.
Yep. So buckle up. The annual Pennsylvania Farm Show is this week. I love the Farm Show so much. Since 1991, a highlight of the event has been the huge sculpture created from hundreds of pounds of butter. So in our trivia, we're asking folks, what was the first butter sculpture?
I actually have no idea. I keep up with the butter sculptures, but I've been doing it recently, so I know this year's, but...
You're not on the historic butter culture beat?
No, I'm not. This was before I was born, so not relevant to me.
Well, if you want the answer, we're not going to give it to you here, actually. If you want to play, you've got to head to our website. That's pittsburgh.citycast.fm. We have our trivia there every week. But for our listeners, we will do you a solid. What do y'all think this year's butter sculpture is?
I'll pass it to Mallory since I already know.
I'm just going to go with kind of the most wholesome and maybe generic option out there, which would be a cow.
It is often a cow.
Yippee, you got it right.
It is a cow.
I did not
with
prep
also
for that.
People in it too. It's not just a cow. It's pretty elaborate.
That was an honest guess.
Yes, it is a cow. They somehow balance hundreds of pounds of butter on those teeny tiny little legs. I know it works in nature, but I am amazed they can make it work in butter.
I'm amazed that it looks that beautiful because I just imagine the butter melting. I'm sure if you're going to put all that work in, you're going to do climate control and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Have you seen the photos? They put it in its own little room. It's very climate controlled. No one can touch the butter.
Yeah, but just with all those people around, I'm just surprised there's not some child running at it or something and somehow, I don't know, messing up the display. That's what I would do if I was a kid.
I mean, that place where they put the butter, that's new. I don't know what they did in years gone by.
In 1991.
What do they do with it after? Do they just everybody busts out a dinner roll and goes to town, or where does this butter end up?
I feel confident that whatever the answer is, it's not that. So let's get into the recent news. This one you may have missed, but it's about a Pittsburgher being held in detention in Russia. His name is Mark Fogel. He was a teacher from Oakmont. He's been there since 2021. And the big new news is that the U.S. government finally officially designated him as, quote, wrongfully detained, which means that the government's now committed to working on getting him released, and they can put more resources into a case like that.
Good.
Yeah, I know this is something his family and some local lawmakers have been advocating for a while now. And I guess he actually got this designation back in October, but it wasn't made public until the very end of last year. A little bit of background. Fogel had been working in Moscow as a history teacher. He was teaching the children of diplomats. And he was actually flying back to Russia for his final year teaching there, his 10th and final year, when he got arrested for carrying cannabis. This is medical cannabis that he had been prescribed in Pennsylvania to treat debilitating back pain. And he got sentenced to 14 years at a high security penal colony. If this sounds a little familiar, he was tried in the same court as Brittany Griner on really similar charges. You know, she, the famous WNBA star who also got arrested for having cannabis in a Russian airport. And she was freed as part of a prisoner swap back in 2022.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been several prisoner exchanges since Fogel was initially detained. There were 2 exchanges that year, 2022, Griner's and another person. Both of those involved swapping 1 U.S. prisoner for 1 Russian prisoner. Then there was the really big one back this past August. A couple dozen people were released all at once, including a journalist and a former U.S. Marine. But Fogel got left behind. The family was so devastated. The State Department said that they tried to include him in that August deal, but they weren't able to get it done. According to his family, part of the issue may have been that he wasn't technically listed already as wrongfully detained.
And this designation means that the U.S. government has credible information that Fogel is innocent or was potentially detained in order to influence U.S. policy.
Yeah, so obviously this designation, it's really big news for his family. His mom, Malphine, had been working with lawmakers from both sides of the aisle for a while, and she told KDKA that she really doesn't care which president gets him out, whether it's current President Biden or incoming President Trump. She just wants him home. And, you know, she and her family have more hope than ever about getting him back now that he has this new designation.
Well, here's hoping that 2025 brings good news for the Fogel family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, moving on to national news, but with a local tie, I want to talk a little bit about the first bill that the U.S. Senate is considering this year. It's called the Laken-Riley Act. This is a bill that would make some pretty dramatic changes to the way immigration policy works in our country. It would take away some people's rights to due process. It is being co-sponsored by all 52 Senate Republicans and at least 2 Democrats, which includes Pennsylvania's own John Fetterman.
And I feel like this is a surprise for some people since Fetterman, when he was running for office, was pretty pro-immigration.
Yes, more on that in a second. But first, I kind of just want to explain what this bill is. It was named for Laken-Riley, who was a nursing student in Georgia. She was killed last year by a Venezuelan man who'd come into the U.S. without authorization. He had been arrested a couple of times, including once for shoplifting from Walmart, but he wasn't detained after those arrests. This is obviously a really tragic story, but his history and what happened is now being used to push legislation that could really reshape the way that immigration policy works in our country and who has a say in it.
And Mallory, really glad that you're the one that has been reading and researching this specific one, because I know you have a lot of experience covering border policies and immigration policy, like literally in Texas. Like you lived and breathed this stuff for a while.
Yeah, I used to live in El Paso, Texas, covering immigration. So I just want to get into some of the details of the bill. Like, probably the piece that is getting the most attention is the fact that federal authorities would be required to detain undocumented immigrants who have been arrested for minor nonviolent crimes like shoplifting.
The nonviolent piece, I think, is like one of the most important ones.
Yeah, exactly. I see people pointing to the example of this could be like a mom shoplifting diapers for her child would have to get put into custody. She or anyone else swept up in this couldn't request bond, and then they could face deportation, which is a change from our current law where people can face deportation if they've been convicted of at least 2 petty crimes. And, this would apply to groups like DACA recipients and people with temporary protected status, would all be detained before they've actually been convicted of what they're accused of.
Yeah, again, the due process piece.
Yeah. Another big piece of this that maybe isn't getting quite as much attention is that state attorneys general could also sue the federal government if they believe an immigration action or policy has harmed the state or its citizens. So in effect, this could give individual states a lot of power to shape federal immigration policy. I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but technically a state attorney general could try to impose a ban on all visas from a specific country.
Which as a nation, we've done before. The Trump era travel bans that Biden immediately overturned when he took office.
Yeah, but that's the federal government doing it. This gives the power to, like, if the attorney general in Texas, Ken Paxton, if someone's getting...
Who I did not elect.
Right. But so, like, if the government were trying to deport someone to China and China said, no, we won't accept them, then Ken Paxton could say, okay, well, now we're going to try to ban all visas from China.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want anyone in Texas making federal policy on really anything. I only want it to be the federal government. They're the ones that I actually voted for by and large,
Mm-hmm. Having a say makes a really big difference.
Yeah. So that's like definitely a concern that some people have about this legislation. But, the bill did pass in the House with bipartisan support. So some Democrats are definitely backing it. But, bringing it back to Pennsylvania, I think it's notable that John Fetterman was, for a minute, the only Democrat co-sponsoring this bill.
So not just in support of it, but willing to put his name on it from the jump, saying, I sponsor this. It's just a slight distinction.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's really kind of staking a claim to this piece of legislation.
And I think it's important to also remember, like, for most of his career, he's done a lot of work to make sure that he is known as an advocate for immigrant rights. Like, his wife, Giselle, she was a dreamer. Her family came to the U.S. from Brazil when she was little. They were all undocumented. And now she's eventually become a citizen as an adult. She was attending naturalization ceremonies actually pretty frequently until recently. Maybe she still does, but her socials aren't nearly as active as they once were since Senator Fetterman had that stroke in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Right. But, as a couple on the campaign trail, they talked a ton about her story. Mm-hmm. When Fetterman just tweeted about his support for this bill, he did say he supports a legal path for dreamers. So it's not like he's done a full 180 on this issue. But he has been taking harder line stances on immigration, calling for stricter border policies. And it all feels like it's part of this larger political shift that he's made in the past couple of years.
A pretty big shift. I mean, recently he said he was open to the U.S. buying Greenland. So,
which is not for sale.
It's not for sale. Greenland does not want the U.S. to buy them. But, that's something Trump said he's interested in. And, Fetterman has said that he would not support taking Greenland by force. But he compared buying Greenland to, like, the Louisiana Purchase or buying Alaska from Russia.
Both not famously
the same situation.
Policies.
Stepping back, like, this is not a situation I could have imagined we would be in with our senator talking about purchasing Greenland, but this is where we are. I was actually reading a Philadelphia Inquirer story about all this, not about Greenland, but about this proposed legislation.
Policy,
yeah. The reporters there talked to the executive director of the Pennsylvania Immigration Coalition, someone named Jasmine Rivera. And she said that personally, she felt like Fetterman was, quote, turning his back on the immigrant community, end quote, by supporting the bill. And she talked about this experience of, standing with Fetterman and his family outside of an immigration detention center in Berks County holding a vigil not that long ago, and how, like, after that kind of experience, it's been really hard to see him taking this kind of a stance.
Yeah, that makes sense to feel that sort of betrayal.
Yeah, so as we're recording this, the Senate is supposed to begin talking about it, and the next few hours, there could be a vote or even some kind of resolution in the coming days or more.
Even by the time you hear this episode, potentially.
Yeah, who knows? So make sure you check out our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter for the latest. We're also going to try to throw in a roll call for how our House members voted. So definitely check that out if you want to read for yourselves.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
So this next story is the gift that keeps on giving, although I should probably say taking. Toll rates on the Pennsylvania Turnpike have increased again this year.
Again.
Tolls have gone up every year for over a decade, and they will keep increasing every single year for at least 2 more decades.
Fun.
Boo! The official end to the hikes is currently 2050, but I'm going to be honest, I am kind of skeptical that they're actually going to stop then.
This year's jump is 5%. Next year's jump will also be 5%. And, allegedly in the future, the increases will drop to 3%. But regardless, I will keep doing my method, which is taking I-80 instead of going along the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
You drive extra 30 minutes, 45 minutes, hours out of the way?
Probably about an hour and a half, because I go to New Jersey a lot to see my parents, and I guess now maybe I'll consider flying training. I don't know.
Yeah. So, let's talk about why they're doing this. The Turnpike is in debt, but it cannot stop spending money, because then the roads would crumble beneath us. So they agreed years ago to put the burden to some extent on the people who actually use these roads. And in the meantime, they've been trying to build some efficiencies. So like how we use our easy passes and getting rid of toll workers, like automations, that kind of thing.
So I was doing a little reading on this, and it seems to me like people with easy passes will actually pay less, even though the rate is going up because of these new efficiencies. It was hard for me to follow. Please explain this to me, Megan.
Yeah. So, part of it, again, I do want to always acknowledge that human cost, because the jobs that human beings did in these toll booths, they're gone now. So part of that is how they've decided to save money. But the other is also in how the fees themselves are going to get calculated. That's going to make up the price difference you're talking about. So first off, you do get a teeny tiny discount for using your Easy Pass. Otherwise, if you don't have one, you get billed through the mail. So if you don't have to do the mail service, like stamps and envelopes and all those things, that's just a little bit less. Used to, if you've ever driven a turnpike here or elsewhere, you slow down and you go through those toll lanes with the little booths and the flashy lights. So even though humans don't work there anymore, that is still how, in some parts of Pennsylvania and elsewhere, that's still how you get charged, just because you still do that slow down thing, right? Even though there's no one there to take any money anymore.
Right.
But how we're charged is based on how many of those exits that you pass by or drive through. That is all going away.
Okay.
So they're slowly but surely being replaced with this thing called open tolling, where your fee is going to be based on the amount of miles you drive.
Okay, the miles you drive instead of the exits you pass.
Correct. So if you look at the back, if anybody remembers this, used to you would get a ticket at the toll booth and you could look at the back and it was a set amount between each stop. None of that's the case anymore. So now it's going to be based on miles, and that'll be counted when you drive under gantries. So
those now?
Gantry. You've definitely seen them, but maybe not you, Sophia, because actually if you're avoiding them. But if you've been on a turnpike in our area, there's one around Cranberry area, there's one close to the airport. They're those big metal pole things that stretch all the way across, kind of the way big signs do. Yeah. But they look like they have cameras or something on them, and they have bright lights too. So those have a name. They're called gantries. And they're building a whole bunch more of them over the next couple years to replace all those booths.
I am actually pro gantry if a person isn't going to be there to help me anyway, because I have gotten stuck at those booths when
the thing doesn't open.
Yeah, the little gate doesn't open, and that sucks.
So the gates aren't really even there anymore, even for the booths, if you still have to go through those. And there's tons of them. They're all over Pennsylvania still, but they're phasing them out. And so they won't have to do any of the maintenance or any of that stuff. You'll just drive under the gantry. And also a benefit, you will not have to slow down anymore. There's no traffic jams waiting on somebody to figure out how to pay.
Yeah, keep speeding, everyone.
Yeah, granted, but at least the turnpikes are nice and wide. They actually say it's much, much safer, because then you're not increasing the likelihood that people aren't paying attention and they ram into the back end of somebody else.
Before I moved back to Pittsburgh, I was living somewhere without tolls where you could just take your trip and not have to factor in that expense. And so any form of toll, whether it's a booth, whether it's a gantry, it's disappointing to have to factor that back into my travel budget.
Yeah, it's definitely some good news, bad news here. The bad news is, yes, it's there, and yes, it's going up. But good news, they're doing it slightly more efficiently than they used to.
So another state story, but let's move off the roads and over to the Capitol building, or more specifically, the governor's office.
Yeah, so I noticed our friends over at Spotlight PA have really been hammering Josh Shapiro's office lately, and I wanted to run through just a few updates that I noticed. We're going to have links to all these stories in our show notes if you want to read more. So number one, Shapiro is taking heat once again for taking sports tickets from people with business before the Commonwealth.
Okay, I'm going to just take a wild guess here. did he take tickets for the Eagles versus Steelers game?
The Steagles game? Yes, he absolutely
But
did.
who was he rooting for?
He's made it very clear.
Oh,
He's
okay.
an Eagles person.
I have not paid attention.
Oh, no,
It's a
he's-
sports game. I wouldn't know.
He's a Montgomery County person. They actually made a whole thing of it. He argues that, and his administration argues that, like, when he makes appearances for stuff like this, and like he and Austin Davis, the lieutenant governor, who's from Pittsburgh, made like a side bet about this game, like that it's part of the business of the Commonwealth to do stuff like this. And to be clear, like there's nothing illegal here. He is allowed to do this. But it's been criticized as being just like a not great practice when donors are giving you stuff and then they maybe want something politically from you later on.
That makes a lot of sense.
So number 2, Shapiro has declined to act on a whole bunch of clemency recommendations.
And if you're not familiar, clemency is just the process where the governor grants mercy for a crime. So they erase your conviction or at least reduce your prison or parole sentence.
Exactly. So the previous governor, Tom Wolf, he signed 1,600 or around 1,600 clemency petitions during his second term. And Mallory, that was actually in part because of John Fetterman. So he was Tom Wolf's lieutenant governor in his second term, and he took a huge role with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Pardons while Wolf was in office. Spotlight
And making it easier, right, to get a pardon.
Well, to change the conversation, certainly. Spotlight reports that a lot of these applications, which are still coming in like crazy, they're for people convicted of violent crimes a lot of the time that they committed when they were minors. But, maybe they've served several decades or more in prison at this point. A lot of people review these applications, by the way. They take it really seriously to like make a determination about someone's fitness to return to society. And then, once it's been approved through that process, and there's different routes that it can take, some of them require unanimous approval, then it goes to the governor's desk.
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast, to say the least, like Fetterman's past advocacy for criminal justice reform in that way, while he's now stamping his name on something that will detain more people for minor crimes.
Yeah, and I think that's important.
Accusations of minor crimes.
I think that's the distinction, is like in the immigration conversation, it's nonviolent and it's accusations, not convictions.
Yep.
With Pennsylvanians, it is violent crimes often that were convictions. And he went out of his way to try to change the system, which a lot of people said was for the better. Advocates now are really pretty frustrated, actually, that there's been kind of a cooling effect since Shapiro took over a couple years ago.
Has he responded to that criticism at all?
His administration, his office, says that he does take them all really seriously, and because of that needs time to consider them. I do think it's important to note that he's only denied a couple dozen up to this point. The others are still sitting there, so he could still act on many, many more in the next 2 years if he so chooses.
And then one more little bit about Shapiro. He seems to be campaigning a lot for someone who technically isn't running for anything right now. But like, I don't know, maybe he got his taste when he was a VP contender and was like, give me more spotlight.
Sort of, actually. So this, again, is a Spotlight PA story. And a lot of his campaigning over 2024 was done as part of that run-up to Kamala Harris choosing a vice president, or just generally showing up in support of Democrats writ large. But I do highly recommend the Spotlight story because not only do they go into great depth about what he has spent and how, but also who has been giving him money. And one name just made me laugh. Are y'all familiar with Scooter Braun?
I am indeed.
Taylor Swift question mark?
Yeah,
Yes.
Taylor Swift nemesis.
Taylor Swift
Noted
nemesis.
Taylor Swift nemesis, Scooter Braun.
Scooter Braun is giving money to Governor Josh Shapiro.
Why?
I
What's
don't
his
know.
stake here?
If you want to read more about that, I really, really encourage you to check out the link in our show notes from Spotlight PA.
Wow, if ever I've heard an endorsement of a story, it is that.
Well, I'm going to take it away from the state level and go with politics back at home, back in Allegheny County. First up, some changes at County Council. 2 counselors are stepping down. One is doing it right now, and another just says he's not going to run again. So first up, Sam DeMarco. He's leaving council to work for newly elected Republican Senator Dave McCormick.
McCormick, of course, taken over for Bob Casey, who's been in office for 18 years and lost election this past November. If you ever hear like really blunt criticism of the county executive's office, of, some silliness, of foot on county council, it is almost always Sam DeMarco who's doing it. The man loves a Twitter fight.
X fight.
True. But he didn't even need people to respond. He would just put it out there and wait for the TV stations to pounce. It was wild.
In case you weren't on Twitter/X, some Sam DeMarco facts. He's from North Fayette. He's been serving on council since 2015. He's also the chair of the Republican Committee of Allegheny County, but he's actually going to be stepping away from that as well so he can focus on his work with McCormick. He's going to be McCormick's Southwest Regional Director, so there's going to be multiple offices open for this, one based in Pittsburgh if you want to, knock on his door. Take the Twitter fight in real life. I don't know. But he told the Trib that as part of this role, he'll be working with constituents and McCormick himself, when he's traveling through the Southwest region.
I really like that language too, traveling through the Southwest region, acknowledging perhaps that he doesn't even need to continue the facade of living in that big Squirrel Hill house. He's just going to move on to DC, traveling through southwestern Pennsylvania.
Well, anyway, in case you're wondering what's going to happen to DeMarco's seat now, council will be appointing an interim member until the next election. We don't yet know who that's going to be, but it will definitely be a Republican because the new member has to be from the same political party as the person who's stepping down.
And like I said before, there's one more person leaving council, Bob Macy. He lives in West Mifflin, and he's retiring at the end of the term. So no one to replace him. He'll just be done when he's done.
Yeah, and our longest serving council member at this point, he's been on council since 2006. So going to be interesting to see how some new faces affect council in the coming months and years.
And quickly, a couple new hires at the county. So we have a health department director now, Dr. Yulia Van. She came to us from North Carolina. She was previously the health department director in Guilford County.
And then County Executive Sarah Namarato nominated a new jail warden. By the time you hear it, he might be confirmed. His name's Trevor Wingard. He was actually interim warden in 2011, and he's also held positions with the PA Department of Justice and at a couple of state correctional institutes. And WESA reported that the criminal justice advocates in Pittsburgh are feeling more hopeful about this new nominee.
And both of those positions had been open for over a year, so it's nice to see them finally getting filled because they're really important roles.
Definitely.
And now some super fun county news. You can now vote for an I Voted sticker design. So you can do this on the county website through January 27th. There are 10 finalists. They're all from high schoolers in the county.
I love this so much. For years, the county declined to provide stickers to our voting precincts because, I get it. They cost a lot. And I think, for some, they felt sort of silly to provide as an incentive. But there's actually been some really good research out there in the last few election cycles that suggests that while stickers might be silly, they also work. People like collective action and they like sort of broadcasting to people that they did something. And also the designs are just cute.
I have to imagine it's some good peer pressure. If you're out and about and everyone around you has their cute little stickers on, maybe you're a little more likely to drop into your polling place, feel like everyone else is doing it.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I have already voted for my favorite I Voted sticker design, and I'm not going to influence Jens or anything, but I do think it's kind of a big deal.
Wink, wink. My vote is a secret, just like my vote at the polls. Anyway, the winner of the sticker contest will be announced in February, and you'll see the sticker floating around in the primaries in May and then also in the next general election.
I love it. And last up, some fun things to watch on TV right now.
TV time, my favorite mini segment. Lots of Pittsburgh happenings right now. I'll start with the newest. The Pit aired its first 2 episodes on Max yesterday.
I feel like this is the television event we've been waiting for because we have discussed this numerous times on the podcast. It is a medical drama focusing on an emergency department in Pittsburgh.
And created by the folks who brought us ER back in the day or worked on it. I'm not really clear who had what job.
Also starring Noah Wiley, who was also an ER star. So a lot of familiar people in the mix here.
Totally. Some scenes were actually filmed here in Pittsburgh, around Allegheny General Hospital, for example.
And the series is 15 episodes. The finale is coming out in April, so this isn't something that you're going to watch all at once. I will be catching up on the first 2 episodes this weekend.
please let us know, A, how Pittsburgh it is, and B, regardless if it is worth a watch.
Oh, I can promise you my mom is going to watch this one immediately.
Your mother, the medical professional?
That's true, yes.
We can compare notes. I'm just here for the drama. The next TV moment for ongoing releases, Lydia B. Collins, a local drag queen, is on the latest season of RuPaul's Drag Race. It's still pretty early in the season. Episode 2 releases tonight. And if you want to watch with friends, P-Town in Oakland does a viewing party with the new episode at 8 every Friday. And then there's a drag show, at 11 p.m. This watch party is hosted by other local queens, but Lydia was there for the premiere, though, which I think is very cool. She's got some shows in other cities the next few weeks, I think.
That's awesome. I'm so excited about that.
Then there's another show I recently learned about. It's called The Pradeeps of Pittsburgh. It's not quite as new. It came out in October, but you can binge the full season on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, it's a comedy about the Pradeep family. It's in the name. They moved from India to Pittsburgh, and they're at risk of deportation. The story's told in flashbacks as the family's being interrogated by the FBI.
This is a comedy?
I'm also a little confused about it, but I actually haven't seen it. The creator of the show, Vijay Patel, he drew on his own experiences when working on the show.
He's from Pittsburgh?
Yeah, his family immigrated here, so he spent some time here. So I'm curious to see if this one's maybe like a little more Pittsburgh specific. There hasn't been a season 2 announced so far, but the first season is just 8 episodes, so also a very easy weekend watch.
And last up, also on Max, is the Hard Knocks series focused on the Steelers and the other AFC North teams. It's been on for a few weeks now, covering like the prior week's events. So the producers and videographers for this thing are turning it around so freaking fast. And if you're just like a film person, the cinematography on this is legitimately amazing, even if you don't care about the sports ball of it all. It is sort of a bummer now, I will warn folks, because in the beginning of the show, like it kind of started in the middle of the NFL season. The Steelers were doing like so well, and we are not doing well anymore.
Nope. I don't even follow the Steelers, but I know that.
Oh, I don't follow them. I don't know.
Well, so playoff football starts this weekend, and we were like in every way expected to be like the winner of our division, that AFC North, and we tanked. And now we are not only not the winner, we have to play in the wild card game. So that's like you have to win the wild card to get the buy-in to the regular playoff series.
Sure.
We could win, but it's against our like main rivals, the Baltimore Ravens, and they are so good. We are probably going to lose unless we really get our act together. But the show itself, Hard Knocks, it's just like, it's really good. I also think an important aside for anyone who's even considering watching, it is hilarious to me how bad the Steelers facilities, like our physical spaces, look compared to the Bengals, the Browns, and the Ravens. Like, I totally get now why our players union has rated us so poorly the last couple of years. Like, literally part of Tomlin's office is right next to the bathrooms. Like, there's a scene I remember specifically where he's like walking in to like talk to somebody, and you hear audibly flushing in the background.
I thought you were going to say worse than flushing.
I mean, like the chairs in the main auditorium for the Steelers, like it looks like they belong in like a freshman intro class. They are not built to fit 350-pound gladiators. Like, it's just been like a fun side game of mine and my friends, noting all the ways that our facilities just sort of pale in comparison to these other teams that we like to kind of shit on all the time.
Okay, but I feel like if the possibility of like being publicly shamed by this airing on TV didn't cause them to upgrade facilities, like nothing's going to. This was their chance and they blew it.
I mean, I don't know. Sometimes the effect happens after the fact. Like now everyone will have seen it and can judge us for themselves.
Well, it sounds like if you want to relive the glory days of the beginning of our season, this is the show for you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. If you are liking what you hear, please write us a nice review. It really does help people find us, and it's a really nice way to show the CityCast team that you care, because we read them all. Our music is by Benji. Mallory Falk is our executive producer. Sophia Lowe and Elizabeth Kama produced the show this week. Francesca DeBecco writes our newsletter, and I am your host, Megan Harris. We'll be back on Monday with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend, everyone.
It's like a Pope mobile for butter.